what's the real posting schedule that you think, is there a code to this of like, if you really want to gain traction, it's this much volume, you can't shy away from that?
So I'll tell you, like, when I was doing the Facebook Live, so that was 5 times a week. We haven't missed putting a reel up in 3 years, I think.
Yeah, one daily reel?
Reel, yeah. And the key with that is not like we're trying to shoot one every day. You batch your stuff.
Right.
So shoot, get in front of your phone and shoot 10 videos.
Right.
And then put them up. Or you have a backlog. So that, and then if you're looking, I never understood the story stuff until again, people are voyeurs, right? To me, when going back 10 years at the gym, high school kids would say, you got to do stories. I'm like, I don't even know what that is. At the time, I didn't really have any interest in it. But that too, like on the way here, I pull up my phone, just put up a video of what I'm going to do. So it's just letting people into your world. And the stories, I aim for at least 5 a day.
Sounds like what you're saying is you need to, maybe step out of your comfort zone a little bit to like make the message pop, even if your message is kind of boring.
Yeah. You got to figure out how do you make it interesting, right? Is you want to become, and even if the message is bland, that's where you as the character, you want to be. If you do it right, you want to become an interesting and fascinating fictional character to most people, because most people are never going to meet you, right? Or they might. So you think about superheroes, right? So if you look at Superman, at first the readership was not what they expected. And it didn't make sense. It's all American, this alien from another planet. But people weren't relating to him because he had no weakness. So then they came out with kryptonite. The metric is see if you can do 3 months straight or a month.
Yeah.
Whatever is not intimidating to you. Can you do a week where you do it? Right? Because you're going to get better each time you do it.
The mindset strategy that I've learned in a lot of different areas is they call it high intention, low attachment. If you are attached to the outcome of like, I'm going to do 10 emails and get a buyer, you will be fucked.
Yeah.
Like you were attached to the intention and the activity and not the outcome.
Yeah, exactly.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Little Jim Big Heart. I'm Devin Gage. You probably noticed a little bit of a different background today. That is because I have a very special interview with my friend Kyle Newell, aka the Panda Man. Kyle, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Devin. We've known each other a long time now, so I'm glad you had this idea.
Yeah.
Get the message out.
We are in Kyle's studio because Kyle has grown an exceptional personal brand, and that's what I want to center today's episode on. There's no shortage of gym owners and fitness professionals that want to develop their own personal brand. And there's nobody that I know personally that has built a better personal brand than you. And I think you have a lot of insight to share, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I imagine, on what it's like to build a brand. So why don't you give us a background on what your brand is and kind of where it came from?
Sure. So from when I started the gym, even when it was in my parents' basement, I knew that content was essential. So I started a YouTube channel, I think in like 2010, just shooting it on, I don't even remember what those things were called, those video cameras that had the USB stick.
The flips.
The flips, yeah. And I would shoot them and put them up. And throughout the years, I just stayed consistent, trying to hit a daily Facebook Live, using it more for, at that time, the local celebrity factor, right? Just putting it out there because I didn't really definitely didn't see any local people doing that.
Right.
And I would just get on there and talk about whatever I was interested in. Obviously, a lot of it was geared at fitness and then the fasting later on. And then that kept growing. Then a couple of years ago, so owner here, probably 15 years ago, he came to the gym with his best friend. So we knew each other. He came a few times. And about 4 years ago, I see that he was watching my Facebook Lives. And it's not really my market, that age group.
Right.
I said, why is he watching the Facebook Lives? I get on there with my mallets and all that. And then he reached out and said, hey, do you have a TikTok channel? I said, no, I don't really have any interest in that. Because, to me, it was just a younger person's platform. He said, well, I have an idea for, a social media agency, media company. He said, you would kind of be the perfect fit for it. So we teamed up and just started shooting, consistently that whole first summer. Shooting content, whatnot. And I've been in front of the camera for a long time, so it kind of came naturally for me. And then it just started taking off as far as the Panda Man. I remember it was 2 years ago. So only 2 years ago. I was in Jamaica with my wife Devin, And we went on the trip. We had about 5,000 followers. By the end of the trip, it was 25,000.
Wow.
And it just kept, spreading like wildfire. So I think people were interested in, I think really the authenticity. That's a key factor.
Right. Well, let's go back to the start, because you were doing a lot of public speaking, right? To promote your gyms. You had 2 locations. You're doing a lot of public speaking. You were doing these workshops. I think it started with like heart health, fasting, stuff like that. I remember because we used to try to replicate a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah.
And so what was the like first foray into develop when you were like, all right, maybe I'm going to go in on this like branding thing?
Yeah. So it was when I was still teaching. Because I was teaching and running the gym. I'd gotten a Dan Kennedy product. It's called the Supernatural Influencer Code. I remember at the time it was like $3,500. But anything I made from teaching, I was like putting into the business.
Yeah.
It was just an awesome education in how really people are attracted to personal brands. You get the same marketing message. So I really started studying personal branding, like the science behind it,
right,
and all that. And then I'd run the speaking engagements at the gym, and I hated speaking. I used to go to Toastmasters because I knew, okay, this is going to be essential to be able to speak, and speak clearly. And it's not my strongest suit, but I studied it. I'd get up into Toastmasters, and I used that for probably a year. You're familiar with Toastmasters?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd get up and do my talks. And once I felt like I progressed enough, I stopped going to that.
Right.
Then I'd put on the seminars at the gym, really, again, the whole thing while I was studying the Dan Kennedy thing was the power of the local celebrity.
Right.
Where people, I wanted everybody, in my mind, I was okay, if like 10% of the town knows who I am, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Right. So I would do that. And I would give seminars on different topics, mindset stuff, heart health. I would joint venture sometimes with doctors, align myself with them.
Yeah.
Which is another powerful thing.
Well, let me stop you really quick because there's a few things you touched on that. So I always try to keep this podcast very, very tactical.
Sure.
And it sounds like you took a very tactical approach. So you started with, all right, this is what a personal brand is. Somebody that can speak, somebody that's got an identity and a message. And you broke that down. You're like, all right, my level of speaking is low. I need to attack that skill. What I think most people miss the mark on is they don't approach these soft skills like hard skills.
Yeah.
Like everyone knows if you walk into a gym and your squat looks like shit, you can drill it. You can, break down the movement. You can work with a coach. Most people I find don't go that far with soft skills. They're just like, I'm not a good speaker. Like I can't do that. Or they just do it even though they're bad at it. And they expect to get better just by doing it.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you were like, all right, I need to go to Toastmasters because I need to break down my public speaking ability and actually make measurable and like deliberate practice.
Yeah.
And you're also going into it with the idea of if 10% of the town knows who I am, I consider myself a success.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody usually starts there. Like it's awesome to hear that. I think that's a good takeaway.
Yeah.
Going into it with a very granular and specific, like, I'll be a personal brand when 10% of my local town, which maybe it's 10,000 people or whatever, know who I am. That means I need to host X amount of events with this many in attendance. I need my email list to be this. So that's great.
Yeah.
Sorry to throw you off.
No, it's all good, man. Yeah, with the speaking, building that skill, like some of my buddies will tell me that I've grown up with, like, it's unbelievable how far you've come. Because I used to mumble and I hated being, I dropped out of classes in high school when I found out that you got to give a presentation. I was petrified. Even in college, I remember just like being petrified of that. And then building that, right? And Matt Fury worked with me a lot on my speaking skills as well, about how there's little things, right? You don't have to rush. You can leave the silence, and that draws people in. You can change your tone.
Right.
And things like, so I kept studying that. But meanwhile, the writing preceded that. I knew that the emails, right? So going back to like 2008, I started sending out a daily email, blast.
Right.
I was writing a weekly blog. I think the writing really enhanced the speaking. You got to get clear on your thoughts. I write the way that I speak. So that was another thing I learned from Dan Kennedy and Matt Fury.
It's a great tip. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people try to make it too grammatical. I'm like, that's not how you talk. It's much easier to read if it's like a conversation.
Right.
Right. So the writing, I put a ton of time into, still put a lot of time into that. I have my goal with writing is at least 500 words a day during the week. And I do that, writing different products, writing a daily email, and constantly studying that too. Like I'm always getting critiqued, like I said, by Matt, and see, okay, was this effective or no? And a lot of it will tie back to the storytelling, which I think is a skill that a lot of people will say, I'm not a good storyteller. Then they'll tell you about a story. I'm like, you're a great storyteller.
Yeah.
It's just pulling stuff from your life, and then how do you tie it back to your philosophy?
Right.
And that's the same thing with the emails. It doesn't have to, people, when I tell people about the email method, I'm like, people don't really care about the information. They call it infotainment, right? So you don't teach them too much in that.
Yeah.
Right? You kind of give them stuff so they're learning, but you're not giving away all the secrets.
Right.
And that ties into the business end. If you give people all the secrets, why would they buy your product or hire you?
Right.
A lot of people are like, well, I already got what I needed. I don't need him.
Yeah.
They kind of throw it away. So it's, what I really focus on now, like I said, is the storytelling, because that's just oldest form of communication, pulls people right in, sucks them right into your world. And they don't even know what's happening, but they're like, oh,
right.
It just pulls them in. It doesn't matter how bland the story is.
Yeah. So, my audience, a lot of them are gym owners or people that want to open gyms or work in gyms. As far as like the personal brand thing, where would you say if somebody is drawn to that, they want to be an influencer, they want to attract an audience, like what's the very first thing that you would say they should work on or do or action step to take?
First thing is the authenticity of who they are. That's the most powerful thing.
So explain that.
So that could go with how you talk, right? What you talk about. I remember with the fasting, telling people about that, just going back over 10 years. Oh, you can never sell fasting. That's stupid.
Yeah.
Telling people not to eat, right?
People pay a lot of money to be told not to eat.
Yeah. It's great, right? And it's like having that authentic message where I think a lot of people, even if they're starting on a local level, they want to have their message be kind of where nobody's going to attack it, right? And to me, that's always been the wrong mindset.
Just playing scared.
Yeah, because if you're doing that, are you really being authentic? And what are you scared of, right? People are going to judge you either way, right? So what is your message? And then as far as, it was probably in 2020.
Well, let me ask you this before we get into, because I know 2020 is when it really picked up for the local audience. What if the message is not agitating, or what if the message is that they're most authentic speaking? Like, listen, there's a lot of these evidence-based people that speak a very vanilla message. It's like, hey, calories in, calories out is the key. Don't listen to any of the people like the Panda Man that tell you all these crazy things. Yeah. So what if the message is like, do they still have a chance, or do they need to play a little bit into the dramatization of it?
I think they have to make it so their message, even if it is what everybody else is talking about, they got to put some type of unique twist on it. Right. Whether if you're counting macros, okay, well, hey, I'm pushing where you can have a lot of carbs. Something that stands out a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like you have to create a little bit of an enemy.
Yeah.
You got to create a little bit of tension.
Yeah.
And I think this is where a lot of people struggle. I struggle with it too sometimes, because I pride myself on being a very logical thinker and a very analytical person. And it seems antithetical to try to dramatize something that is just a fact, right? Yeah. But I think my view on marketing for my gyms is like, tell them what they need to hear, give them what they need. So I think it sounds like what you're saying is you need to, maybe step out of your comfort zone a little bit to like make the message pop, even if your message is kind of boring.
Yeah. You got to figure out how do you make it interesting, right? Is you want to become, and even if the message is bland, that's where you as the character, you want to be, if you do it right, you want to become an interesting and fascinating fictional character to most people, because most people are never going to meet you, right? Or they might. So you think about superheroes, right? So if you look at Superman, at first the readership was not what they expected, and it didn't make sense. It's all American, this alien from another planet, but people weren't relating to him because he had no weakness. So then they came out kryptonite, and then it took off. So I've always shared my struggles too. Like that's a big thing. So even if your message is there, like if you look at what we're doing with social media, I share a lot of my life, which is going on,
right?
Which has nothing to do with fasting or training. right? It's letting them into my world. And people, learned long ago, they're voyeurs, right? That's why reality shows have
Right.
always been so big. They want to get it. Most people's lives are boring. So they want to get a glimpse into somebody else's life, right? So I'll just put up videos with the kids.
Right.
This is my life. This is what it is. So I think that's it. Like if your message is the same as everybody else, how else do you stand apart? That could be the way you dress, right? Where I wear the colored glasses, but it's authentic. I don't do it. It
Right.
wasn't something I did to, let me see if people like this. It's like, and that's where I think people, you remember Seth Godin had a book that We Are All Weird. And that was the title of the book.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't want to embrace that because they're scared of getting judged.
Right.
Right. So building up that muscle where I don't really care what anybody says about me, because I'm just being who I am.
Right.
So it's like, all right, if you don't like it, that's fine.
Well, and I think all the stars came into alignment because you were somebody that had a pretty unique style about you, and you had a message that all of them kind of came to fruition. Yeah. How would you? Because I think there's still value in building up the character. If you don't have I don't feel like I've got much of a character, right? So if I was going to develop a personal brand, I feel like I would have to kind of manufacture that a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. Do you feel like that's a necessary part in this? Like maybe they have to dress differently, or maybe they have to, like Greg Doucette talks differently in some videos. Like, how do you go? Like, what would you say to somebody that maybe they were missing that little factor, because I think it comes out of charisma. That's what charisma is there's some novelty, there's authority.
Yeah.
Where would you tell somebody to start that maybe doesn't naturally have that character in developing that without losing authenticity?
So some of my old videos, like a simple example, when I had the whiteboard in the garage, I would use, because me and my wife were both teachers, but I had those finger pointers. So I would just use them in the videos when I'm doing the whiteboard. And I remember Joe Hashey made a guy, he's like, Kyle's always got this pointer, but people noticed it, right? And another thing that ties into that, and again, people have to get comfortable with this, is the self-aggrandizement.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people repeat back to me what I tell them. Like years ago, I started saying, I'm the world's leading fasting expert. Nobody else was saying that. I was saying it, but I believed it. Yeah. Right? So that was the key, but I just kept saying it. I'm the world's leading expert on this particular knee injury.
So say something about that self-aggrandizement, because I think that scares people.
Yeah.
These things that maybe it's their ego, maybe they're afraid of imposter syndrome or whatever. But totally. I remember early on, you were like making that statement, and it's true because you believe it's true.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And I think when I started the gym, when I got into the strength and conditioning, my goal at the time was to be the top strength coach in the world. But after I kept thinking about it, I'm like, well, who's going to anoint me that? Like, there's no award for that. And it's certificate, all this stuff. I'm like, nobody's going to anoint me that. I just have to start saying it.
Right.
Yeah. And start saying it. But again, you got to believe it. Right. So there can be, again, it doesn't matter how bland it is, but if you believe you're the best, you have to tell people that. But most people, like you said, they're not comfortable with that.
Yeah. Listen, I have a story about that, because our vision in my company is to be the gold standard in fitness. And I have two things to say about it. So we've been saying forever, like, we're the best gym in Westchester. We're the best gym, the best fitness community in America. And whenever I think like, man, are we really that? I'm like, I could ask any of my clients, like, who's the best gym in Westchester? I'm like, you guys are. I'm like, cool. That's the anointment that I need.
That's it.
And I think that's all you really need, because there is nobody that's going to anoint you with that. And I'll also say, I watch a lot of documentaries about like guys like Mike Tyson. Boxing and baseball were always my background. The one consistent with all of the greats is they said they were great before they ever were.
Yeah.
Like Mike Tyson was saying that he was the greatest heavyweight in the world before he ever fought professionally. Ted Williams was saying he was the best hitter that's ever lived before he ever batted 400 for his career. Muhammad Ali said he was the greatest ever before he ever was anointed the greatest ever. You have to believe it before it ever comes to fruition. And I think most people are waiting for some validation or somebody to anoint them of that. And it really is the opposite way.
It's the opposite.
Yeah.
And I'll tell, just being honest with the listeners, I tell these guys sometimes too, dude, I'm still shocked when people are like, oh, I read your book or I listened to your video. Because in my mind, it's still that novice mindset where, I have the empty cup. And in my mind, I go and I'm like, nobody's listening to this. So doesn't matter, right? And I still, it ties into the imposter syndrome. So I always get a chuckle out of that. I'm like, oh, people are actually listening, and taking it in. Then if you look at Ali, that's a great example too. So he believed it, but that aggrandizement, he knew that was going to sell, to his fights, build him up as his brand. So he was a showman too, right? Like he knew I'm the greatest, and the way he would talk, and especially in that period of time, it was a lightning bolt.
See, you have to, if you want to have a personal brand, you can't shy away from that self-aggrandizement a little bit. You've got to play into that character. So you did that by being the greatest fasting expert in the world. What else, as far as developing that character, would you say is necessary?
It goes back to what we were talking about with the speaking. If you can become a great communicator and talk about topics that might not have to do with your message. Like when I do conspiracy topics, people love it.
Yeah.
Right, but that's a great interest of mine. But what the hell does it have to do with fitness or fasting? Right. But so the speaking, I think nailing down the pace at which you speak, you can, I mentioned Elliot before. He's interesting the way he talks.
Is that Elliot?
Elliot Hulse.
Okay.
He'll, start camp and he'll use different tones. He'll extend words. Right. So you can just play around with this yourself. And like a simple tip this is a real simple one that will separate you from so many other people that are doing social media. I know now you can edit everything, right? And if you cut out extraneous words, which is a great game to play in your mind, even because I practiced that, that was something Matt had me doing. Most people was, and but, yeah. And they're trying to feel this. But even when you have a conversation with somebody and they don't do that, subconsciously, I've always thought, okay, that's a sign of some type of intelligence.
Certainty.
Yeah.
I've used in one of the episodes, I used the analogy of it's gravitas, right? Yeah. And I say, if you have a message to share, that message, the weight of that message, right? Let's say it's a 1 pound rock in one hand, and then you've got 50 pebbles in the other hand that equal 1 pound. You throw the 1 pound rock, it's going to break through the window. If you throw the 50 pebbles, they're going to bounce off.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you can get your message to be one solid piece, every word is going to hit so much harder when there's less filler words, when it's less like pebbles hitting the window. It's going to come off as way more authoritative. It's going to be, people conflate certainty and conviction in their speak with knowledge, right? It's the reason, people with authority speak with such incredible certainty. People are like, man, he probably wouldn't be this confident if he didn't know what he was talking about, even if it's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to believe in your message.
Yeah.
In as far as developing the message, that's where I always tell people, just keep experimenting. Experiment on yourself. That's how I've developed, a lot of my stuff is unconventional, but it's because I was experimenting. I was looking for a better way. Yeah. Trying everything. And I've always kind of been, anti-authority just by nature. So I always questioned the mainstream narrative, whatever it is, right? And then it leads me down this path or that path. So I think, I think there's so many simple things people can do, but even if they do the self-aggrandizement by themselves, and just say it in the mirror.
Let's give an example of, what's a normal way to self-aggrandize or develop a character? Like if you were a coach at a gym. So I wish a lot of my coaches would develop more of a personal brand. And like, I'm the guy that, we had a coach for a long time and he was like the mobility, he was the animal flow guy. And just that character that he played up did really well for him on the coaching floor because anybody that wanted better mobility or to be exposed to this very novel type of training would go to his sessions. So what would you say is like, even like an entry level character, like maybe not wearing colored glasses or, shaving their head into a triangle, like all the stuff that you're doing. Yeah. It probably took you years to develop and refine that presentation. What's like an entry level way that somebody could start developing their character or even try on different hats?
Yeah. Well, it could be if we're using the coaches at the gym, what type of music are they listening to?
That's a great example.
Right? Like
it's a great example.
It's so simple. Right. So you get like, they still bust my chops when I go to train at the gym because I'll put on, 70s rock or Grateful Dead. But to me, it's peaceful, right? And I don't care what anybody else thinks. right? But if you're a coach, a lot of them are all listening to this. And as far as like the mobility guy you had, a lot of the coaches have some type of passion about stretching or bench press or whatever. So go in on that, right? And study that. And if they have a leader like you that says, hey, you have the freedom to take what you're passionate about and let's teach it. Do an extra class on it or something like that. And then you got to be, if you're going to develop this character, you have to be curious about at least one thing where you're like,
right,
man, I just got to keep learning about this. Keep learning about this. And then what happens is that leads to this, there's something called like a stack. I look back at my career, right? Started with, bodybuilding, then it obviously led to nutrition. Then I started a business and I was like, okay, I need to learn how to market. Then I learned how to write.
Right.
I get into the mind mapping and, the fasting. And it's a unique stack and everybody has that.
Yeah.
So you just have to evaluate, look back. But I would say the simplest thing is if you don't want to do it, start with the music you're playing. Put something different on. And they can all remember, I really wholeheartedly believe this. If the masses are doing this, just do this.
Yeah.
Do the opposite, switch it up. The contrast is so powerful in the brain.
Yeah. I was going to say contrast and novelty are charisma hacks.
Yeah. It's so huge.
Yeah. And contrast. So let's talk about, because this is something I'm talking about. I've never talked about it on the podcast, but so contrast, I think, is one of the most powerful charisma hacks that exists. And the examples are like guys like Kyle and myself. We have tattoos. Some might consider us jacked, muscle bound. At first glance, you might think that we were meatheads or, not very intelligent or not very thoughtful or maybe, super aggressive. But you meet Kyle and you're like, this guy is like the sweetest, most intelligent, thoughtful person that I've ever met. They might not say that about me, but there is a contrast there that I think is magnetic. So I think you play into your natural qualities. Like if you're super tall, right? Or if you're super short, like there's contrast to just your physical presence, to your intellectual presence that is magnetic just by itself.
Yes.
So that's a great place to even start, is like, how can I create a little bit of contrast there?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is a great point. It's to the look, to what you talk about, to, I think about myself. I'm very introverted, right? I've had people say that, a lady that works for them was telling me, you're intimidating. And to my mind, how am I intimidating? I've had people at the gym tell me that, right? But and that's part of the panda, why I chose that, was people view it as this cuddly animal, but it can also rip you apart. Right. So it's like, okay. And I think what people can do as far as a simple thing, everybody can develop. You develop an alter ego, which helps you do a lot of things. Like I've got this, Batman symbol here. It's got my initials, but to me, that represented my alter ego.
Yeah.
So I can step into that when I need to, and make decisions that are hard for me to make as Kyle. Okay. Make them as your alter ego. And you can step into that. And I think the contrast, a good example would be what I was talking about too with the, I hit him with the Bigfoot video and go back to fasting.
Yeah.
Hit him with a chemtrail video, go back to the fasting. Right. And other people stick with the fasting. I'm like, no, I'm going to do what I want to do because that's just who I am.
Yeah.
And I think contrast in your words, hot, cold, tall, short, it's like the story. It just pulls people in.
Yeah.
That they can't look away.
Yeah. Now, so going back to, on the tactical side, you started developing this character, the Panda Man. You were doing a lot of local stuff. COVID, you made national news.
Yeah.
Defying the COVID lockdown orders. I think that's where things really popped off.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe the timeline's off, but I think you really were like, I'm going to do something with this personal brand now. If somebody else was like ready to take that really formal step, I mean, you hired some coaches. I don't know if you want to share your experience with hiring some big time influencer coaches, but what did you do to be like, you know what, I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to turn this into an income source. What was the first major step that you took?
Yeah. So you had all the COVID stuff. And I always tell them, if we had this when that was going on, it would have been millions of people at this point. But at that point, I was still just doing my local thing.
Yeah.
But as far as like me and my wife, for years going back, I would tell her, the personal brand is where it's going to be at. Because I've been studying that since really 2008, and I felt like I was kind of uniquely suited for it in some ways. So we kept talking about it. COVID happened, national news, and that was very draining for me. Just because again, I'm introverted.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing it for attention. But then a couple of years later, before these guys reached out, we were talking about it around New Year's Eve. And she's like, "Oh, you got to make the move. You got to do this." So I said, "All right." And then the stars aligned. I don't think it was a coincidence. They reached out, said, "Okay, this is the next."
They reached out, your camera guys.
Yeah.
Right. So we're at Haas Media. That's where this great set is at in Raritan, New Jersey.
Yeah. And think about why, I was telling you why owner reached out. I would be on the video every day doing something different, my mallet drill, and just talking while I'm hitting the ball back and forth. It's like a weird thing, but it's something I do every day. So
I remember those. I got mallets from those videos, but I think that goes again, like you can't be afraid to be curious on. You've got to be curious about something and not be afraid to like deep dive into stuff that you're passionate about and really become an expert. Like all of this has to start with becoming really an expert in something. You became really interested in mind mapping stuff.
Yeah. Remember
how the brain works.
At your gym,
yeah. So just for context, he would do these mallet drills with a golf ball and do math equations or like a series of math, whatever you call it.
Yeah, just memorization.
Yeah, memorization stuff. And I think that was the first foray into like, this guy's into some like cool stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really, again, it goes back to stuff I'm interested in. I've always felt the deficiency in my mindset. So therefore I study it a lot.
Yeah.
Try to learn it and learn the mind mapping stuff and how the brain works. So and that ties back to what we were talking about, the authenticity. And, around 2020, it probably was, I just embraced like social events. I hated them, dude, because I just never felt comfortable at social gatherings.
Right.
So like, what am I going to talk about? I like all this weird stuff. And then that year after the COVID stuff, it just kind of clicked. I'm like, I'm just going to accept who I am and just start being more of that at parties and stuff.
Yeah.
And what happens is people
stop getting invited to all the parties.
Yeah, you stop getting invited. I'm kind of like, it's so funny when we're out at something, everyone will be like, man, they all want to talk to you because I'm talking to them about stuff they never talk about. Or maybe they're interested in, but who are they going to talk to it about?
Right.
And they'll get me going on a Bigfoot topic or some other conspiracy. And then it's different. It's contrast, right? It's contrast. But it started with, okay, just embrace that you're weird. If you don't accept that, you're going to be just like everybody else. Everybody is weird. Most people hide it.
Right.
Because of the judgment piece. But who cares? And once you realize that judgment, people, they might judge you, but then they forget about you. Or they might judge you, and then they keep coming back for more.
Right.
Right? Because they want to see, it was like the old Howard
Watch
Stern
the train wreck.
Yeah, yeah. Remember, you see in Private Parts?
Yeah.
Where Big Vomit was like, his listeners listen for like 2 hours a day, his fans. Well, how long does the people that hate him listen to? 3 hours. He's like, what?
Yeah.
So it's like that. And you look back at the 2016 election, I knew just from studying all this, and I was telling people, I'm like, Trump's going to win. Even though all the media was saying he couldn't win. And people would be like, why do you say that? Because he's a celebrity and he's a lightning rod, and it's so different where you either hated him or you loved him.
Right.
Right. And the power of celebrity, you use that in any local business, that trumps everything.
Yeah.
Being a celebrity. And
also, I referenced earlier the way you speak with a level of conviction. Like, again, people conflate certainty and conviction with knowledge and expertise. When you heard like the two arguments, like just for example, communicating on immigration, Trump's stance was build a wall. Yeah. It's like, it's so simple
it's clear.
That people are like, they don't have to, they have this cognitive load that doesn't have to get, on the Democrat side, I've always said Democrats are terrible marketers.
Yeah.
And it's literally just like, well, there's nuance to immigration. What if they come in this way? What if they come in this way? That causes cognitive load. Yeah. And the worst thing for growing your brand in marketing is cognitive load. The more people have to think and parse through what you're saying, the worse it's going to be.
Yeah.
The fact that Trump was so simple, people conflate that simplicity with ease, and they associate ease with expertise.
Yeah.
So I think in personal brand, like people shoot themselves in the foot by trying to be too technical or too like nuanced with their approach. The more you can simplify it, and as much as you may like get squeamish thinking about oversimplifying really complicated topics, you got to tell them what they need to hear and give them what they need in the long run. If it's a super complicated topic, you still have to deliver it in a mechanism that is like easy to swallow.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can give them the like really hard stuff on the back end, but you got to get them in the door.
You have to. And I think an advantage I had with that, when I was a teacher, it was K-4.
Yeah.
And I was teaching them stuff I was teaching at the gym, but it was okay. I literally had to explain it to second graders and third graders. So just simplifying.
Yeah.
Like exactly what you said. Just
teaching Bigfoot to second graders.
Teaching them that. I would do some crazy stuff. I'd dress up as Mike Myers. You can't even do that now. But it was really, like you said, simplify, right? There's too much complexity, especially in fitness. People, if you make them think, like you said, just like in sales, you make them think too much. Think about it.
Yeah, it's right? The dilemma of choice or paradox of choice. Too many options leads to no choice being made. So again, first step into developing the personal brand, is it a certain platform? What's the like?
First thing I would do, you can use, at the time for me, like I said, I started on YouTube. That was really what I knew. So whether you pick one platform.
Do you start with one?
I would start with one.
Yeah.
Yeah, start with one. For me, it was really, Facebook, I'm going to go live every day.
And was that your rhythm every single day?
Yeah, besides on the weekends, I usually want to do it. But it was like, and I tell people, I'm like, even if nobody's watching, it's practice. So don't record a video and put it up because that's totally different energy.
Right.
Right? Like get on there live, work on your speaking skills, talk about what and it's okay if nobody listens. And
if nobody listens, you just had a free practice round.
That's it, man. And then what will happen to people, when you get true fans, they'll start digging. I've had people say, man, I can't believe how far you've come in this period of time. Well, and then the consistency. So you pick one thing and just start going live. 1 minute video, 2 minute videos, right? And just start doing that.
Yeah.
Because what we see in personal branding, just like anything, people, they might get into it and they stop, right? There's no consistency.
Why do they stop? Most people stop.
I think they're not seeing the results, right? But it ties into like the 10,000 hour rule.
Yeah.
You're not going to see it right away.
Right.
Just keep showing up. Keep showing up.
Do you have a reference for how long it took you to get any sort of traction?
Yeah, I mean, in
terms of like videos posted or hours or even days.
Well, if you look back to when I started to when I teamed up with Haas Media, you're talking about since 12 years. I was just doing stuff, right? And I didn't even have any way to really measure it at the time. I just knew that, okay, keep putting up YouTube videos from the basement. Yeah. Keep putting up the videos. I was using it more for the local, but to me, it was like, I'm putting it out there. And even with like the emails, like I haven't missed a daily email in years. And I've had people say, even if they don't open them, man, how do you write an email every day? So just that, right?
Yeah, it's like brushing my teeth.
Yeah, it's just like, but even if they don't even open it, you keep popping up. You keep popping up, right? So I would say the metric is see if you can do 3 months straight or a month.
Yeah.
Whatever is not intimidating to you. Can you do a week where you do it, right? Because you're going to get better each time you do it.
The mindset strategy that I've learned in a lot of different areas is they call it high intention, low attachment. If you are attached to the outcome of like, I'm going to do 10 emails and get a buyer, you will be fucked.
Yeah.
Like you were attached to the intention and the activity and not the outcome.
Yeah, exactly. It was just like, anybody can be persistent.
Yeah.
Yeah. That doesn't take any talent.
Yeah. Right? And it's the only way to develop talent.
It is.
To get the reps in.
Yeah. So pick one platform and just, if it's YouTube,
do it for 12 years. That's the advice.
That's it.
Do
really.
it for 12 years before you expect anything. But honestly, we can't shy away from the fact that personal brand sounds sexy. Everybody is like, man, I'm going to get 1 million YouTube followers. They look at some of the people that have it and they're like, what they're doing is dumb or it's not even that good. And they think they can do it. They don't realize that like watching you, man, it looked like an overnight success, but I've known you for 12 years at this point.
Yeah.
I know you've been doing this shit for a long time, but from the outside, somebody might be like, holy shit, you got 20,000 followers while you were in Jamaica. Like it's that easy, but it took you 12 years, took you 10 years to have that one video that blew up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's it. You know, if you give up too early, you're never going to be able to succeed. And I think the importance of staying with it, I think a personal brand is like one of the most powerful assets you could have nowadays.
Yeah. I was just talking to some friends that started a podcast and they were like, "When should we like plan for monetization? Like, how do we do this?" And I'm like, honestly, if you go into it with trying to monetize it, you're never going to get there.
Yeah.
You're attached to the outcome. You have to do this from just the pure passion for it and the love of creating content. They have 3 women that are doing this together. They're doing these videos with your friends. Like that is the only way that you'll ever even reach the level of monetization. But if you go into it being like too much of a focus on the outcome, you're just never going to get there. Unless you're an anomaly like the Paul brothers or like people that just the day they turn on, like Elliot Holst was another one of those guys that like
struck at the right time.
Yeah. Struck at the right time or just, they had that. I mean, he just was a great personality. Yeah. He's charisma. Yeah.
And you look at how consistent he was over the years.
Yeah.
Right. Even if you look at the Paul brothers, they were on that Disney show.
Right.
You know, so they had that background. I think I tell these guys, I think the magic, which I haven't seen many people do, but guys like that, you know, you look at Mr. Wonderful, when you could combine the social media with like legacy media, right? So that's going to be the next focus of mine is getting on more syndicated media.
Yeah.
You know, because you put those together. If we had this during COVID, it would have been like wildfire.
Right.
You know, it would have been insane. I saw just from being on the news and all that, people reaching out all over the country. A lot of haters, obviously, during that time, right? It was okay. But I think if you're planning it out, really think of over time, how can you combine those two? Can you get in a local paper?
Yeah.
You know, you start putting that together. And again, you just start on the local level. Start on the local level. Be consistent. I have people that will watch my stuff or read my stuff for years before they pull the trigger on anything.
Yeah.
But I keep showing up.
Yeah. So consistency, is there anything, so commit to one platform, consistency. What's the real posting schedule that you think, you know, is there a code to this of like, if you really want to gain traction, it's this much volume, you can't shy away from that?
So I'll tell you, it's like, you know, when I was doing the Facebook Live, so that was 5 times a week, we haven't missed putting a reel up in 3 years, I think.
Yeah. One daily reel?
Reel, yeah. And the key with that is not like we're trying to shoot one every day. You batch your stuff.
Right.
So shoot, you know, get in front of your phone and shoot 10 videos.
Right.
You know, and then put them up. Or you have a backlog. So that, and then if you're looking, I never understood the story stuff until again, people are voyeurs, right? To me, when going back 10 years at the gym, high school kids would say, you got to do stories. I'm like, I don't even know what that is. You know, at the time, I didn't really have any interest in it. But that too, like on the way here, I pull up my phone, just put up a video of what I'm going to do. You know, so it's just letting people into your world. And the stories, I aim for at least 5 a day.
Five stories a day.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of times it's more than that.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like, and there's sometimes, you know, it drains me. I hate the phone. You know, it's not, it just drains me, right? So I'm going against my natural energy, but I know it's for a greater good. And that kind of ties into, you have to believe, like we talked about your message, but believe that it has the power to help people.
Right.
Right. And then if you hold that in, you're withholding that gift from people. So you got to, whatever mindset trick you have to do to, okay, this message has to get out there, because if I'm struggling with it, again, share your struggles. Somebody else is struggling with it.
Do you have like a rhythm or do you have like a cadence of, you do 5 reels, one's family, so you let people behind the curtain, one's a tactical thing, one's a conspiracy. Like, is there any rhyme or reason to that, or are we not there?
Not there yet. Yeah. A lot of it is, I want to get more into the mindset stuff, you know, and the fatherhood type of stuff.
Yeah.
But as far as the reels, we'll kind of, you know, I'll come up with ideas. Sometimes the guys will have ideas, and it's just thoughts I have about, okay, this is a variation of this, or, but they're all interests of mine. Right. That I put up. But I don't think it's a bad idea to have that type of setup for Facebook. what I still do is I still go live in there a lot. Like Mondays is Mental Toughness Monday. Those are just lives, right? Tuesday, I call like Tuesday Winsights, Wednesday Wisdom, Thursday Blaster, Friday Finisher. So I developed that over the years. Again, most of the time, dude, when I go live, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about.
Right.
I put in Friday Finisher and I hit live.
Comes back to like get good at something
Yeah.
that you can talk about on any day of the week.
Yeah. And I think too, for a lot of people with content, all the stuff I've studied, all the stuff I taught, it's stuff that I was learning for myself.
Right.
Right. I was learning for myself. That was it. You know, and that's, oh, this works.
Yeah. I mean, this podcast, like most of the episodes come from, we're in a staff meeting and a problem arises. And then I go home and I like read a bunch of books or topics to figure out how to solve it. And I'll take that and be like, this is what we're doing to solve this problem that's in my business right now.
Yeah.
And then it gets stored in my channel for anybody to use. And then I share it out and people seem to appreciate it.
Yeah.
But, all right. So 5 reels a day.
5 reels, 5 stories a day.
5 stories a day.
Yeah. Reel a day.
At what point would you branch off into multiple platforms?
So what we do, right, is we'll leverage the same piece of content on the other platforms.
On the same days?
That's how they do it. You know, so these guys do a great job with that. So it's not like, okay, I got to shoot this for this, this for this. Obviously, YouTube's a little different. That's the next thing we really want to grow. And something I'm passionate about because I think it's a different level of interest on YouTube, a higher level customer.
I think like longer term, like longer form
Yeah.
video.
Yeah.
Okay.
And personally, that's what, if you're going to pick social media, that's what I prefer is YouTube. That's where I go to learn a lot of stuff. I'm always listening to YouTube videos. You know, I think that's just somebody that's a little more interested. They want a 10 or 15 minute video. And I think too, telling people, when you start, don't overcomplicate it. Just take out your phone, right? That's all. You don't need to have a studio like this right away. You don't need to have everything professional right away.
Yeah.
Just build the reps, you know, and it's like you said, I think Dan Kennedy said all overnight successes take at least 12 years.
Yeah.
Right. People just see it and, oh man, that was easy. No, there's a lot of work.
So you might as well start now.
Yeah.
So start imperfect, take imperfect action now, because 12 years ago, you're going to wish you would have started back then.
12 years is a long time to get good at something. You know, it's think about like yourself, right? When we met at Vince's years ago, where you started now you got 7 gyms on the way to 100. It's 12 years, right? A lot has happened, but look how much you've done in that 12 years.
Yeah. And you mentioned the stack earlier. Yeah. And I'll never forget, I actually saw Elliot Hulse speak at the Underground Strength Con back in the day. You might have been there.
I never went to one.
It was with the Ultimate Warrior.
I got the video of it.
Yeah, so Elliot Hulse spoke, and I'll never forget what he talked about. He had everybody doing bioenergetics, taking their shirts off, screaming in the room. I thought we were going to get kicked out of the room, but his talk started with, he said, he's full of shit. And he basically said, he's like, I started my career the football guy, and then I was the strongman guy, and then I was the yoga guy, and then I was the bioenergetics, guy. And that was his stack. Like, he's got this crazy complex aggressive power lifter plus, meditative Buddha guy, like
contrast.
Buddhist contrast. But he's like, that's what made him unique, was he had acquired all of these like deep skill sets that he could blend into an incredibly unique one-of-one character.
Yeah.
And I think you said the same thing. Like, you were a bodybuilder, you became the fasting expert. Now you're into like a lot of the conspiracy and the health stuff. Yeah. So I think I've got a similar thing. Like, I've gone rabbit holes of hypnosis, NLP, communication, business, competing in strongman. So it's like, you've got to have that. You've got to understand what you have and be able to speak from all those different lenses into what's a really unique character that you can come out with.
And I think it ties back to what you were saying, before we started. Like, the only way you can develop that stack is if you're constantly learning.
Right.
Like you said, you're always reading, right? And you're at that point where basically you get paid to learn, which is a beautiful thing. If people aren't going to constantly learn, first, you're not going to have ideas for content.
Yeah, that's where I get the best ideas.
Yeah. And you're not going to grow at all. So it's like the ideas aren't just going to, some ideas will come to you, but when you read one sentence, it's like, and like Elliot did, like it's happened with me and you, right? Like, this interest, okay, no, that led to this interest.
Yeah.
I never thought when I was being a strength coach, I would love marketing.
Yeah.
It wasn't even on my radar. But then I was like, this is really interesting, the
Yeah.
psychology of that. And so I think you just got to just remain curious is one of the main keys. Oh, you wanted me to talk about some of the coaches.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've invested, obviously, and you've mentioned a few of them. Like you mentioned Toastmasters, you've invested in coaching. And this is, I mentioned it earlier, people want to develop a skill, just like a hard skill. Just if you're in fitness, like people are paying you to coach them on squats, deadlifts, whatever. Like if you want to be good at personal brand, you should invest in a coach. You should invest in a public speaking coach. I've invested more money than I'm like proud to admit in my own education and different skills and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's huge, man.
So who are the people that you've brought in to teach you, coach you up?
So I had Wes Watson, and I knew at the time he kind of just popped up, I think, on Bradley's podcast, and I had never heard of him before, that he was a big influencer. And his message caught me, though. So I started reading his website, and then it was like, okay, if I want to go this route, invest in that. And I went back and forth, and I'm like, all right, I know if I invest the money that I'm going to make that next step, because I'm just investing. I'm not going to let the $12,500 go to waste that I gave him for 6 months.
Right.
Kind of teach me his blueprint. There was a lot of stuff he did I didn't agree with, and, the way he would talk to people and whatnot. It didn't vibe with me. But the point for me was, okay, you put the money in. Now you're going to do it, right? And then,
there's a loss aversion there.
Yeah. And obviously Vince has been coaching me for years, and Vince is, he studied a lot of the personal branding stuff. Vince is a mutual friend and coach and mentor of ours. So I had Vince and then Matt Fury. Probably before I was ready for Matt, I hired him in 2017. But at that point, this hadn't developed fully yet, right? So I wasn't able to fully utilize his teachings. And then about 2 years ago, I reached out to him. So I think I want to start coaching again. And Matt kind of has already done, not necessarily, he was great at the personal brand, using stuff like cartoons. Like that's something people can do, right? And his stuff was just always interesting to me. I was studying it, and he's a world-class storyteller, world-class email copywriter, world-class copywriter. So Matt coaches me now, and we're just refining stuff that I'm doing. Like he'll watch it, or he'll say, hey, your email sucked today. All right. I'm open to I don't have, and that's the thing. You got to put your ego aside and say, give me feedback, right? But I think if you don't have a coach and something that you want to do, I think it's just a stupid move.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a wise move. But people look at it as an expense. Where I'm like,
well, so let's talk. I think a really important thing to talk about is how you are approaching this from a business lens. You run gyms.
Yeah.
This is now your main income stream.
Yeah.
So if somebody had the goal of not just publicity or to grow their Instagram channel, but they want to monetize it, like how do you get to that point?
You have to have something you're going to create. Right?
Do you start with that? Do you start with a product to sell? Yeah,
that's what I would start with. And the easiest product, which is an exchange is just a lead magnet. Come out with a 3-page report. Like, so writing a book to a lot of people can be intimidating, even though it's not that hard when you break it down. But it's like, come out with a 3-page report that people want. So you always have to ask yourself, based on what you're interested in, what can I create that people are going to want to buy and they find valuable?
So what's a general example of that? If again, general fitness professional, like, is it a diet plan? Is it a case study of a client?
Yeah, for lead mag or for a product to sell?
Both.
So for lead mag, you have to remember that if you know 10% more than who you're talking to, you're considered an expert.
That's a great
right.
thing to remember.
It's not that much. It's people are like, I got to know. I'm like, and I fall victim to that a lot of times. I got to study. I'm like, no, I already know a lot more than most people on what I'm talking about.
And I'll put on this, like, I talk to my coaches that overthink their content all the time. And I'm like, literally the best content I've ever put out was just what I'm eating for lunch.
Yeah.
And why. I'm like, hey, here's a video. I got my food scale. Here's some chicken and rice. I'm putting some hot sauce on it because there's nothing, it's plain and I want it to taste better. And people are like, oh, wow. Like,
yeah.
Like, it's just like people will buy a food scale because I had it in my video.
Yeah.
Like, you already know a lot more than you think compared to your audience.
Yeah, totally. So you create that lead mag. If you're in fitness, it could be your 3 workouts that you really like doing. Put them in there with the video link for each one. Here's 3 free workouts you can do. And then with a book or it could be a report, a manual. It's like with the Panda Diet book. I wrote that during COVID because I was still going into the office every day. And it was like, all right, I'd been studying that, doing that for a year. I said, all right, now I'm just going to write the book.
Yeah.
So I'd write a couple pages a day. It was just my thoughts on it. Before you know it, it's done. With my knee book, it was because when I ruptured my first patellar tendon, there was nothing out there on that topic. So I was like, all right, I'm going to document this. And then for that book, right, so people can see that it's not that hard. All I did was write down some bullets, took my phone out and audio recorded myself. Yeah, and that was it. And that was way before, Amazon self-publishing.
Yeah.
But I just said, okay, I'm going to do that. I sent it to somebody on Upwork. They transcribed it. Boom.
That's how I wrote my book 12 years ago.
Yeah. It's so simple. Like people try to, I'm going to, and if you want to write, like I like writing now, it's like, okay, can I write 10 words a day? Right. Whatever it is, you don't have to
set the bar so low that there's no excuse to make. If you say you got to write 10 pages, you're never going to do it.
Yeah.
Habit is a tangent, but habit change, set the bar so low, you're never going to do it. So just say, I'm going to open my laptop every day, or I'm going to open Microsoft Word.
That's it. Just open and look at the screen. Right. And then another idea for the product, what would you have wanted? Like so with my knee book, what would you, if you're into fitness, you want a 6-week plan to get ripped, right? Like someday you would have been, man, and you have to, whatever you create, you have to think it's really cool. Right? Yeah. And almost create it from that. Like you don't have to do market research and all that. Like, do you think this is really cool? Because other people are going to think, they're going to feel that energy. Yeah. And then it comes down to like, I love 80s retro stuff, right? Cartoons. Do you remember Max he was in one of the masterminds, Maximus Prime? Yeah. So Max still does a lot of my cartoons. Oh, that's great. I give him the idea. Shout out Max. Yeah. And he creates it and it's like this unique thing. And I remember Matt Fury doing that a long time ago, like I say, using the cartoon. So that's another way. Any of the coaches, any of the fitness instructors, have a cartoon made of yourself. Yeah. How many people do that? Yeah, that's great. Right? And it makes you a fictional character.
Right. It's a writer downer. I'm going to make a mental note to make a comic book of myself.
Yeah, dude, I'm telling you.
So I don't remember what exactly we were on at that.
Just kind of creating a product.
Yes, creating a product. So that's another mistake I think a lot of people make is they start making content, but there's no funnel to drive people into.
Get people on your email list.
So you've got to have something. An email list is low hanging fruit. Yes. You could sell a product or a service if you're doing some kind of consulting or coaching thing that you're selling. And then what? How do you monitor? Like, do you approach this? Like, so I use EOS. We're a traction EOS company. Do you do the same thing from personal brand where you're like, this is my niche, this is my purpose? Yeah. And what is the Panda brand? Just to give context into what somebody should look for in developing that passion, purpose, niche, target market.
We actually just hired. So tomorrow we have our second offsite with EOS for this year. For the Panda Man brand, just to really,
that's great.
Yeah, lock it in.
With an implementer?
Yeah.
Cool. Yes. What's his name?
Ryan Charterina.
I worked with a guy for a long time. I'll see if they know each other.
So it'll be here tomorrow. Tomorrow's a vision building day, which is funny. We're going to be going over.
I have a vision building day on Tuesday, Wednesday next week. Yeah.
Nice. It's you know how powerful it is. Yeah. So it's like tomorrow we'll be getting super clear on that. Like my passion is really guys my age, fathers in their 40s and 50s. Right. Doesn't mean that's all who I serve, but that's who the message who we're trying to tailor that to. Right. Yeah. As far as, a lot of it has to do with them being in shape. It starts there, self-discipline. I've been writing down for years, I want to impact 1 million fathers, a
million fathers.
Don't know exactly how that is going to be, but I know it's getting them on my email list, get them on my email list. And then as far as the monetization, that's where you get really good at writing emails. And that's the simple. Right, everybody wants to complicate these funnels. Right, just get them on your email list. Write a story that happened to you this week, and I always tell people, look, you probably have 10 things today that happened to you that could be an email. Just people are like, where am I going to come? It's always happening. The drive here.
It's a Seinfeld concept.
It's exactly what it is. Yeah, and then just link it back to, this month we're selling my fat shredder manual. Right, it's the perfect time of year for it. That brings up another point. Like I write a monthly newsletter, but everything should be leveraged. So when I write those now, it's like, okay, this is part of a book, or this is a manual that I'm going to sell. Everything. I always believed in that concept of leverage. Everything you're creating, where does it fit? right? Don't have to create 3 different things, right? The newsletter, now it's a manual, touch it up. Then it'll be part of a different product.
Right.
So it's like this universe of things you start to create. And when you get them on the email, you start studying the subject lines. How do you get people to open it? And once you get one sale, you know that, okay, I can do this.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody's going to buy it. And if they're not buying it, the messaging, your marketing, your copywriting is probably not up to speed.
So I'd love to do kind of a final thoughts from you. And then I want to recap what we talked about, because I have some things that I think might be helpful to the people that I know are going to listen. And then hopefully it helps other people. But what are your final thoughts? Somebody that wants to develop a personal brand, just whatever comes to mind.
Say embrace, or maybe make a list of what makes you unique. All the interests, even if they don't have to do with the area that you're going to teach about at first. So get clear on that list. You can ask those closest to you too. Hey, what makes me unique? So get clear on that. And then from there, it goes down to, okay, what we talked about. Be consistent with your content. Whatever platform you want to do, whether you say it's once a week, whatever it is, just commit to being consistent with that. Because the path, it's going to unfold as you go. You're not going to know exactly, okay, this is what I want to, what I want to create. But you start getting consistent, right? And then you already have 99% of the people beat because they're just going to fall off.
Right.
Oh, I didn't get 1,000 followers my first day. Those are the first steps, really. The character you look at, you look at like Hugh Hefner, right? He wore the smoking jacket, the reds. That was all to accentuate the character. That was all scripted. Right? Is there something that you can add in, or something that you like to wear that's maybe a little unusual? You start playing around with that stuff. What do what makes you feel good? For me, again, it's like the 80s stuff, nostalgia. So we put a lot of that stuff in what I'm doing because I like it.
Yeah.
Right. And so you start thinking, okay, then you start going, what am I going to create? Like I was saying, what do I think is really cool? How does the cover going to look? What would I like to buy? Because your best avatar is probably going to be people like you in that age range that you know the best. And like we talked about, grow the email list. That's the thing. If you have 1 million followers on Instagram, the first account I had got just wiped because of something I said. It was gone. Yeah. Right. So it was like, well, I can't get those followers back. But if they're on my email list, I own that. Right. I think a lot of people, even the smart people on social media, you'll see them, they're building their email list. Yeah. The dumb ones, they don't realize that's the asset. Right. Right. The list.
Yeah. Because you could get your Instagram shut down, YouTube shut down.
You're gone. Then what are you going to do?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? And if it's YouTube or any of the platforms, remember Adam, right? I've gone through his YouTube course multiple times. There's courses out there on that platform. How do you do this the right way? Yep. Right? So whether it's hiring a coach, invest in it like we were talking about. Study it and study it again and study it again and then practice it. And you just keep studying it, right? And then your stack grows. Then something else will come on your radar that you want to take interest in. Yeah. And realize that it's, like I said, I still am shocked when people listen to my stuff. So if I can do it, I really believe anybody can do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from this conversation, the thing that comes to mind is if you're not in it because you are truly passionate about it and you are not naturally inclined to get up and film videos and write every single day, like that was something that, let's not like brush it under the rug. You were doing this because you loved it and you were naturally drawn to the life of a creator. Yeah. And I don't think if it felt like work, or if you looked at any of this as like, shit, I got to write an email today, you would never have been here. Yeah. Because it took you 12 years. Yeah. And I think that's an important thing is like, if you listen to this and you're like, I want to be an influencer, or I want to get 1 million followers, or I want to make a living selling info products online, and any of this sounds like work, don't do it.
Don't do it.
I wouldn't even try. I wouldn't even start.
It won't work.
I've dabbled in that world. Like again, this podcast, I do this because I genuinely love it. If I was attached to the outcome of I'm going to use this to make money, I would not. Like there's still days that I'm like, man, I got to put a video out, but I just do it because I love it. Yeah. So I think anybody listening, like, let's make no mistake about the work involved and the only way it'll ever work is if you are genuinely passionate about creating content.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to love it.
Yeah.
You got to love creating, and figure out the medium.
Yeah. Well, and we cover a lot of things. So I think a quick little recap, developing a personal brand is you've got to establish what makes you unique. You've got to start honing that character, accentuating, some of the differences, creating some contrast in the way you speak, the way you look, the message that you're sharing. You've got to go in on one platform, stay incredibly consistent, at least minimum every day for years plus, probably whatever timeline you think it's going to take, probably times that by 10.
Yeah.
I think you got to funnel that into a product. And that's another big mistake people make is they just start doing stuff and they have nowhere to send these people. So get a free MailChimp or, a Weber account and just create a simple landing page and say like, hey, if you want more of this, opt in here. Even if you're an employee, it would make me nothing would make me more proud than like a coach of mine, starting to create content because they loved it, going in on a topic that they were insanely curious about and built a little email list. That's how I started. I started at a Gold's Gym doing this stuff. So Kyle, thank you so much for joining me. I think this was awesome. And where can people find more about you?
The Panda Man Official. You can find me on pretty much any of the platforms there, or go to my website, thepandamanofficial.com, get on the email list like we were just talking about. I got a bunch of free stuff you can download. And then just follow along for the ride, see what I'm doing. Yeah,
the top fasting expert in the entire world. Is there anything else that you claim to be the best at?
It's niche, but the top patellar tendon rupture in the world, right? And it's funny, on the side, I looked that up a couple of years ago. There's like millions of people a year that rupture worldwide their patellar tendon. But I'm very confident I'm the best in the world at that. Done it twice with my background. I like to say I'm the top mind map expert in the world, which is a unique thing. And those are really what I would say I'm the best
at. Got Dax Moy shaking in his booties with that claim.
Yeah, I'm coming for you, Dax.
Thank you guys. And don't forget to like and subscribe.